Hey guys, welcome to Bastion Time. I am your host Bastion. This is a quick little video that only exists because about 30 minutes ago, while I was doing my Ring Fit cardio, which I have to multitask in order to even get myself to do. So while I was doing that, I was also watching rando YouTube videos on the big screen, and I watched a video that was pretty fascinating to me, and it was about some drama about GameXplain. Now, if you're not familiar with GameXplain, they're a YouTube channel that does videos that's like, hey, we heard the latest news about the new Zelda game, or the new Metroid game, or the new whatever game. Let's talk about it. The drama that was addressed in this video might be surprising to most people, but to somebody who has worked for a lesser Nintendo fan site, this is extremely common. So I guess people, including the presenter of this information, were shocked that basically people don't get paid at those kinds of things, or if they do get paid, it's not a living wage. And what's confusing about that is like, oh, well, the owner of this, like, they get billions of views. All that creates ad revenue, which goes into the pocket of whoever owns this channel or whatever. So they have enough money to pay the actual content creators. Yes, they do, but they're in it for the money for the most part. So I just thought, I have mentioned many times that I have worked for 2 different Zelda fan sites, and I thought there's a lot of drama behind those situations, so I thought I might do a video that kind of covers it, since I've ran out of relationship kind of drama to talk about. I'm not going to give specific names, but those of you out there who already know which 2 sites I worked at and which order I worked at them at, that's a terribly designed sentence, you'll know, but I'm not going to give out people's names or even the names of the 2 sites. But basically, back when I was scrolling the internets and I was just a regular fan like everybody else, I saw that the primary site that I went to, and frankly, the reason why this Zelda fan site was the main site that I went to, was pure aesthetics. It had, in what I considered, the most beautiful design. It had just recently been redesigned and all custom done, and a beautiful temple, Zelda, like a forest temple kind of look, and I basically just gave it away, but whatever. Well, I don't think they're using that design anymore, curiously. I thought, oh, this site is beautiful and consistent news, and in the style that I preferred, which was direct and factual with just a hint of uplifting, positive humor, as opposed to the second site was just very direct and came across a little juvenile because the writing style wasn't as honed or as journalistic. And then the third site, which was the laughingstock, although I think maybe the most viewed, did insane things, like posted up pictures of like girls in bikinis to talk about, like, ooh, what's the latest news on the new Zelda game? Those 2 things didn't connect, but the owner of that site readily admitted, like, well, but it got me views, so who cares? So I definitely never worked for that third site. And in fact, I've always strongly disliked that third site, and specifically the person who ran it at that time was exactly the sort of person that you might expect would be the kind of person who would post bikini-clad girls to get views for Zelda stuff. Exactly whatever kind of image you have in your mind, that was him. So in any case, back to the first site. So they were looking for a news poster, and I was in a weird position in my life at that point where I was kind of between jobs and had plenty of free time. So I was like, sure, of course it pays nothing, this is voluntary, but why the heck not? So I got hired and quickly found out I was basically going to be the only working writer. There was like a couple other holdouts, but basically as soon as I started working there, I almost immediately became the sole writer, if not like one of 2 or one of 3. And the person above me, the editor, although they're using that jargon completely wrong, what I was basically an editor, and then she would have been like the editor-in-chief, and then the site owner is just a site owner. He wasn't directly involved in this stuff whatsoever. In any case, she was the girlfriend of the owner. Girlfriend in that I think they'd only met exactly once in person. You know, it was a whole online kind of thing. In any case, I had a lot of fun learning the ropes. I'd never done journalism before in my life. I am a writer by nature. I love writing fiction, but I had never actually written news or whatever. So I had a lot of fun learning the ropes, and not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty quick study when it comes to anything writing related. Give me a genre and I will dissect that genre and figure out the ins and outs and the do's and don'ts and research that thoroughly, and then it will be as if I've always written in that genre. Not to toot my own horn. Had a lot of fun, but then drama came where the girlfriend started being interested in a guy that was going to her own actual college that she physically saw on a daily basis, of course. And so she ended things with the site owner, and then I was both friends to both of them, and I was like trapped in the middle, and it was awful and uncomfortable. And, you know, I'm not going to cast aspersions on either of them, but she could have handled things a little better. He absolutely could have handled things a little better. He basically kind of ended up stalking her to some degree and doing and saying some very not acceptable things. And then when I would try to be a good friend to him, but also be like, whoa, bro, you need to hang back on that, things got funky. Anyways, the point is, after she left, he wanted to put me into her position. But at that point in time, I was like, I'm not cool with the way you're behaving. So in fact, I just kind of need to take a break from all of this. Plus, I was just about to start an actual real job. So I did not have the time to volunteer my time anymore because I needed to actually work for a living. And volunteering for this was no small matter. I basically had to be in tune with what was going on Zelda news-wise 100% of the time in order to be able to write the news story before anybody else could, to get it out there and publish before anybody else could. So I had to be like, oh, so sorry, I have to duck out of this whole thing. So I did. And then eventually I came to a point where I had a job where it was kind of like a part-time job, but it was paying way better than my previous job, which was a full-time job. So as a result, I did have some free time. And in fact, even at my job, I technically could get away with doing some news writing or whatever. But the point is, now they were looking for, once again, somebody, the person that had filled the position, what I say is the editor-in-chief position, failed miserably, to be totally frank, and just completely ruined their whole news writing staff. Like, everybody quit, and it was a complete disaster, and there was no rhyme or reason anymore. So I was basically being begged to take over that position by not the site owner, but there was like three webmasters who kind of oversaw, kind of like the Triforce. They oversaw different aspects of the site, and so I was being pleaded with by one of those individuals, who we will call, we'll call him Davey. And so he was like, please, please, please come and be the editor-in-chief. We need you so bad. And so he didn't use the term editor-in-chief. I was like, okay, fine. Again, no pay, but I had time to do it, and I loved doing it. It was a lot of fun. I was already basically in that role to begin with for a period of time after the ex-girlfriend had left. So I was already aware of what needed to be done, and frankly, I was pretty freaking awesome at it. I immediately turned the news staff around. I hired again, volunteers, a whole bunch of news staff, and trained them to be very diligent with actual journalistic standards, no clickbaity titles. Everything is fact-based and not opinion-based. It's written in a journalistic tone, stuff like that. As a result, after doing this for a while and completely turning them around, the owner of the second site that I mentioned, the opposition, said to the Davey fellow, hey, so I noticed your site's doing a heck of a lot better. Can I please hire you to take over not my Zelda fan site, but a Pokemon fan site? And so that guy was like, okay, sure. And so that was kind of not working out super well. And so the owner of that second Zelda fan site was like, well, why isn't this really working out? You know, like your role over at that Zelda site is clearly working. So why isn't your role at my Pokemon site working? And Davey humbly admitted, well, it's Bastion that's running the news and the editorials and everything over in the Zelda site. So So the guy was like, oh, well, we need to bring him on board. And by the way, I should mention, I don't know if it's my place, but the owner of the second Zelda site hired Davey with monetary gain involved. So anyways, when they were talking to me, and they're like, would you please switch over to our site? And by the way, we will pay you money. I was like, I'm getting paid $0 over here. And I could be making some money over here, so why the heck not? So the amount of money, by the way, was pitiful. It was, I don't know if I feel comfortable telling the exact amount, but let's say the amount of hours that I put into that site was as much, if not more, than my actual paying job. And my actual paying job was a part-time job with a decent salary. And I was making, again, $0 there. So I don't know how to phrase this without giving the actual amount away. But let's just say it would have been less than even minimum wage. It would have been less than half of minimum wage for the hours that I was putting in. It was if you've watched that Game Explained video that I'm talking about, it was even less than that amount, but it was something, right? It was an acknowledgement that I deserve monetary value for the hard work that I'm putting in. So I was like, okay, sure, I'll go ahead and do that. Then the owner of the first Zelda site flipped out and called me all kinds of names and said, I still remember that, like, one of the most ridiculous things that he said to me was, I thought I was a good judge of character, but apparently not if you're going to betray me like this. And I was like, look, I just want to make some money. I'm sorry. Like, if you guys could afford to pay me anything, then that would be one thing. And he was like, well, I would have offered, but some ridiculous thing, like, we could have figured it out if you would have just come to me. And I was like, I'm sorry, whatever. Anyways, the point is, I went to work at the other Zelda fan site doing my exact same job, and it was hard at first because this staff, again, their journalistic standards were pitiful, and they were not used to actually having anybody critique their writing or explain to them, no, in a style guide, we as a site use these terms and capitalize things in this way. Like, there was one particular person who'd been writing there forever who was who had like a grade school writing level, and I don't know how he was posting news for them, but it was just awful. And I had to constantly be on him, like, no, please, here are the changes I made to your piece of writing. Please implement those writing changes in the future in your own thing. And it just never happened. So I eventually had to be like, thanks so much for being willing to volunteer, but we're going to have a different volunteer take over. So in any case, the point is, I turned them around, and it was a lot of fun. And what I failed to mention is the fact that, again, in that previous place, I got zero financial compensation. And this isn't except, and it's not really an except because it's still zero, but for E3, I was a member of the staff, so I was able to attend E3 on behalf of this site. They didn't pay for my flights, they didn't pay for my hotel. I took the person I was seeing at the time with me. I got to do E3 because of them, so that was pretty cool, but on my own dime completely. Now this next year, I was going to go back to E3, but in this case, dramatically different situation. They were going to pay for my hotel. I don't think they paid for my airfare, which is kind of interesting. But I was involved in a different project with this second site that was like a streamed marathon kind of thing. And in that case, my food and lodging and airfare was all paid for. So it was definitely much better to be working for a site that actually valued me financially, as opposed to treat me like a volunteer. And another thing that I strongly disliked about that first site was the owner would appear out of nowhere in our forums and rip apart one of my writers without ever consulting me. And I'd be like, whoa, back off. This is my writer. If you have an issue with something they did in their article or whatever, talk to me and I will talk to them. Like, don't just rip them to shreds and make them want to quit working here, Stuff like that, where it was just, he was like a loose cannon constantly. Then eventually the time came where it's always girlfriends involved with these site owners, where the owner of the second site was like, hey, I don't really want to pay for your services anymore. Actually, I'm going to have my girlfriend take over your position, who, by the way, was one of my writers. And not to be horrible, but she was a pretty terrible writer, and I was constantly having to fix her stuff and explain to her the corrections I had made, and then she kept making those same terrible mistakes over and over again. And some of it was colloquial dialect stuff where she was from the South and she would write in a Southern voice. And that's not a journalistic voice. I'd seen that blah, blah, blah. No, I saw blah, blah, blah. Things like that. Perfectly lovely girl, but at that time I was like, okay, fine, whatever, but oh my gosh, this is gonna go to hell. It did, and eventually after I was fired or let go or whatever, eventually they closed down the entire news writing staff there, and then this site owner bought the third Laughingstock site and tried to smush them together, where that site was doing the news, but this site was going to do like editorial stuff or just walkthrough stuff, and then eventually that didn't work out. But anyways, the point is, I had some interesting experiences at both places, and if you have any questions about what it was like to work at either Site 1 or Site 2, let me know in the comments. It was very interesting, and I learned a heck of a lot, and one of those things that I learned is that, yeah, just like in this Game Explained situation, you get paid basically, if you're lucky to get paid at all, and almost nobody does, you're paid basically nothing, which is interesting considering the site owners make plenty. So that is why I will never work for either of those places ever again, although I say that and yet I almost did. Because on the first site I did almost all of their YouTube stuff, and that's where a lot of my followers eventually came to me from, was from the YouTube stuff that I did over there, none of which I was paid for again. And then after Site 2's situation, I was asked by the person who is now running the media stuff at Site 1, basically begged by them, could you please come and do YouTube stuff for us again? And I was like, okay, sure. What kind of ideas do we have about the kind of stuff I could do there? I could do the old stuff that I used to do there, which was like a mailbag thing, and he was like, well, somebody's kind of doing that. And then I came up with what I thought was a pretty genius idea, which was the opposite of mailbag. Instead of me answering questions sent in, why don't I pose a question and then the commenters answer, and I read their comments and then give my, feedback on those comments. I thought that was a great idea. And we went ahead, I filmed it, it was great, I edited it, it got uploaded, and then immediately the site owner took it down and said, what is this? I never approved this. And it's like, what? Yes, you did. What are you talking about? You knew I was coming back. And he was like, well, I never approved this specific concept. And it's like, this is exactly why I left to begin with. So fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, and we're done. So yeah, never associate myself with that site or that individual ever again. That's it for this video. See you guys in the next one. Bye guys.